Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. A lot to talk about today. Good, bad, crazy bad. We'll be talking today about very close to where Jim and I live. One of the dumbest decisions you'll ever see about a local government and how it treats illegals, especially the ones who are likely to cause the most mayhem in their communities. We'll also be talking, as you might expect, about former FBI Director James Comey and the shell formation that he found along the beach yesterday, quote unquote. But we're also going to be talking about Scott Jennings and his latest accomplishment, let's say, on CNN and getting the left to admit something that we've been suspecting for quite a while. So, Jim, all of that to come. I know we've talked a lot about Biden in the last week, but I think the dumbest thing I've heard this week is Jake Sullivan yesterday at Politico saying that he had absolutely no idea, never seen Biden any trouble at all until that debate. He was shocked as anyone, even though most of us weren't shocked at all.
Well, what's more, I believe Sullivan was asked, by this anecdote in the book about Biden not being able to remember his name. His own national security advisor, who'd been working for Biden for a very long time, way back to his vice presidential days. And Sullivan said, I don't recall. So now we have to worry about Biden's memory and Sullivan's memory. I stand by the assessment of my friend Stephen Moore, who said, why isn't Jake Sullivan working at Chipotle?
Well, don't forget Jake Sullivan's a Clinton person, so I don't recall means that's he was well taught by the Clintons because that's how they've stayed out of incarceration for the last 30 years.
It depends on what you mean by the word remember. Is his memory failing? It depends on the meaning of the word is. I've got more Bill Clinton jokes before the end of this podcast, just letting you know. Stay tuned, people.
Well, Hillary Clinton famously campaigned against Barack Obama about the 3 a.m. phone call. But whenever you need to make a call, Open Phone is where you want to be. In today's fast-moving world, your team needs to stay connected to your customers without missed messages, communication silos, or slow phone systems. A flexible and efficient business phone system isn't just nice to have, it's essential to succeed these days. Enter Open Phone.
Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. It works through an app on your phone or computer, so you no longer have to carry around 2 phones or use a landline. With Open Phone, your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. That way, any teammate can pick up right where the last person left off, keeping response times faster than ever.
See why more than 50,000 businesses trust Open Phone to manage their businesses' calls and texts. Open Phone is now offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ML. That's OPENPHONE.com/3ML. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, on to our first martini, our good martini. And Scott Jennings over at CNN has been twisting the Democrats' minds into knots on their evening panels for a while now. And he got another great revelation in yesterday. Lis Smith, former advisor to Pete Buttigieg, I'm going to assume during the 2020 campaign. I vaguely remember her being part of that operation. And so she was talking about the fact that the Democrats are very unpopular with their own voters right now. She was talking about how Chuck Schumer, not really explaining why he was going to allow for the cloture vote to pass on funding the government and so forth. But she says the Democrats have to come up with something other than resisting because resisting's not working. And listen to how this comes out.
I'm going to agree with you that Democrats cannot only be the party of resistance. We cannot, we resisted so hard between 2017 and 2024. We impeached the guy. We prosecuted him, convicted him of 34 felony counts. And guess what? He still got elected. So I don't know how much harder we can resist now.
Are you admitting that, that the case against Trump in New York was part of the organized Democratic Party resistance?
It was a Democratic prosecutor. And at the time, I thought it was unwise. I went on Fox News and said
there were Democrats who said this at the time.
There were a lot.
Just to be clear, everybody who now touts the 34 felonies take it from Liz. This was not a real case. This was a plot to upend the presidential campaign, which backfired.
I just think it was a boneheaded move by Alvin Bragg, but it's not his first or last ones.
Well, I guess we could all agree on Alvin Bragg. But, Jim, you and I had that same opinion. Andy McCarthy had that same opinion. And the same could be easily said for the Tish James case with the financial issues where there was no victim involved and the massive conviction that happened there. So we called it out. And depending on whether you think she was directly admitting that or not, it's good to hear it.
Now it can be told.
Yes.
And by the way, that old saying, look at you the way someone looks at so-and-so. I just hope everyone in life gets some moment where they have that gleam in their eye that Scott Jennings has the moment she says this. His eyes light up like he's seeing chocolate cake or a well-done steak, however you like it, whatever. You can see him all salivating because he can see, she just put this out there. I mean, let's face it, though, I continue to believe, as a much more critical person of Trump, that he should, if he did not want to get prosecuted, he should have stuck to legal activities like taking over buildings at Columbia University. Something that, the prosecutors would never bother with or something like that. So on the one hand, it's kind of interesting that it has now become almost conventional wisdom that this was political, that this was not one of the more legitimate ones, that this was part of getting him. And the other thing is, look, kind of self-evident with Trump's election to a second term, this didn't work. This did not actually, this generated probably public sympathy. Certainly nobody was like, well, I was going to vote for Trump, but then he got the 34, felonies, so now I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. I don't think if those voters exist, they are few and far between. So you'd like to think this would undermine the arguments for lawfare. This would undermine the arguments to attempt to criminalize political differences. Maybe in our foreshadowing our last martini, the shoe's on the other foot now or something. But it is kind of interesting to see a Democrat on CNN basically now saying what can be told, which was absolutely an unspeakable truth right until Election Day.
Jim, I don't know if I'm giving you an idea or somebody's already doing this, but somebody on the right needs to literally write a book, Now It Can Be Told, all of the things that the Democrats are now finally coming forward on that we knew for years.
So, Greg, you're saying we should just republish our columns from, going back to the lab leak to about 2024, everything we said.
Exactly.
Yeah, now, but the problem is we were telling you. Nobody, now it can be told. Now it was told by some of us.
But 90% of your work would already be done.
As I wrote earlier this week, nothing in Washington gets punished like being right too early.
Now, there is some chatter, Jim, that Scott Jennings could be interested in running for that Kentucky Senate seat that Mitch McConnell is retiring from. That would be a fairly crowded primary. We've already got Daniel Cameron, who had been the state attorney general, or I guess Commonwealth attorney general. Then he ran for governor and lost. You've also got Andy Barr, the longtime congressman, running. Jennings would be interesting, though, because those other guys are pretty much Mitch McConnell proteges. So is Scott Jennings, but Scott Jennings is also very friendly with President Trump. In fact, he even appeared at a Trump rally not that long ago. And so if he got in, I think he would actually do quite well. The question is he better and more effective right where he is?
I was just going to say, if you're a conservative, do you want him in the Senate, where he'd probably be very good at that, or at least he is a very quick-witted, knows how, people, it's funny, I was just doing an event at Heritage Foundation this week talking about the Reagan legacy. And there's a lot of preparation that went into Reagan becoming president, but an underrated part of it was his radio commentaries that he did for several years there. It's kind of like column writing, but because they were auditory, he was writing and putting together his argument for the ear. And words sound different when they're spoken versus when they're on the page. And it was one of the many, obviously he'd been a Hollywood actor. He had a lot of skills they brought to the table, but I think it made him think about the issues and think about the best way to make an argument to defend the viewpoints and to make the points he wanted to make. And I think Scott Jennings, with his work on CNN, brings to the table something very comparable to that. Now, being a good senator is not just a communications job. It's interesting. I remember all the talk that the speculation that he was going to be the press secretary at the White House. Leavitt is in that job, and I kind of wonder if you're the Trump administration, you'd much rather have him on CNN every night, driving everybody else crazy and making the arguments that are tying them in knots. So in that sense, that's the downside of having him in the Senate. On the other hand, if you're one of those other Kentucky Republicans, boy, you better be prepared for that debate. Because my thinking is that Jennings has been preparing pretty much almost every weeknight for the past 2-3 years to do something like this. So, but you could charge admission for that Senate debate right there.
Oh, yeah, that could be a lot of fun. And so it's interesting because Kentucky overwhelmingly votes for Trump. Kentucky obviously supported Mitch McConnell for a very long time. People who are more Trumpy don't like Mitch's votes on personnel. He voted against a lot of nominees, most of which, if not all of which, got through. But, it feels like if he does run, he's perhaps better positioned than either of the other guys. But long way to go, and it might be more lucrative. I'm sure it's more lucrative. Unless you're Nancy Pelosi and doing those kind of things, to be right where he is and getting many more people watching the clips than actually watching the shows on CNN. So he's got good options. Scott's in a good place. Let's talk about your business in another way. We talked about the phones, but let's talk about what's eating into your company's profits, those growing expenses. And one of those, I bet, is your cloud computing bill. You may have gotten a pretty good deal to start with your current service, but now that spend is sky high and it just keeps increasing every year. Well, what if you could cut your cloud bill in half and improve performance? Do both at the same time. If you act by May 31st, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you do just that.
Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI, is the next-generation cloud designed for every workload, where you can run any application, including any AI projects, faster and more securely for less. The savings are real. On average, OCI costs 50% less for computing, 70% less for storage, and 80% less for networking. Have your company join Modal, Skydance Animation, and today's innovative AI tech companies who upgraded to OCI and saved.
Remember, though, this offer ends May 31st. That's only a couple of weeks left to go. Only for new U.S. customers with a minimum financial commitment. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. All right, Jim, let's head to Northern Virginia, very close to where you and I both live. Arlington County, Virginia, right next to the nation's capital, just across the Potomac River, home of Arlington National Cemetery. I think most folks are pretty familiar with it. The Pentagon, of course, is in Arlington as well as Reagan National Airport. However, it's a deep blue county. And when you're deep blue, especially when Trump is president, you have an inclination, especially if you want to get reelected, to be a sanctuary county. And that's what Arlington has been for quite a while. But now they're going even further with this. This is insane. WTOP, local major radio news station here, not on the right, says Arlington's board has unanimously approved a plan to scale back the police department's communication with federal immigration officers in the Northern Virginia suburb. At a Tuesday afternoon meeting, leaders voted to make changes to the county's trust policy. The tweak specifically removes the portion of the policy titled Section 7, which detailed instances in which Arlington police can inform U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, about an arrest. The change comes as board members said people are becoming increasingly reluctant to call 911 when they need help. So basically what's happening here, Jim, is that Arlington County is stopping its own local police from communicating with ICE about people in custody who aren't in the country legally. But originally, they had some exceptions to this rule. So it says Arlington County Police Department, this is what was stricken and voted away now, may initiate contact with federal immigration authorities only under the following circumstances. A, an undocumented immigrant who has been identified as a gang member and is wanted or arrested for a violent felony or a criminal street gang offense. Or an undocumented immigrant who is arrested for a felony offense or is a confirmed gang member where circumstances indicate notification to federal immigration authorities is prudent to maintain community safety. And lastly, an undocumented immigrant who is arrested for a terrorism or human trafficking offense. So basically now the cops aren't allowed to call ICE for any reason whatsoever, even if the absolute worst of the worst are sitting in their custody just minutes away from the nation's capital.
So I think our listeners have the gist of the politics of Arlington County. But just in case, like most people understand, there are light blue counties, there are blue counties, there are deep blue counties, and then there's Arlington, which is cerulean, I believe is the technical color. They're looking through the paint swaths, trying to find, what is the deepest blue you can possibly find? And I can see listeners probably thinking, why would Arlington County possibly do this? Well, a little while back, I was driving to visit a friend, and I took some of the back roads through Arlington County, one of the nicer neighborhoods. Well, who are we kidding? They're all pretty much all nice neighborhoods. And it turns out I saw a whole bunch of yard signs there is a Democratic primary coming up on June 17th. And yes, they have their gubernatorial pick selected, but they have a competitive primary for lieutenant governor, attorney general, House of Delegates, 1st District, and county board. There's at least one position where there's a competitive primary. So it's primary season. If you're in Arlington County, you don't want to be seen as helping Trump by continuing to allow the county to, arrest illegal immigrants wanted on terrorism charges. That's, you can't. That's like just like the Gestapo, Greg. We can't have that kind of thing going on around there. So on the one hand, it's kind of shocking and terrible. The other thing, when people are saying, you're telling me that the cops don't have anything better to do, that this is, I went and I checked and I looked it up. It is in Arlington County, the average house price is $847,403. One of the yard signs was arguing. Somebody was complaining about cost of living in Arlington County, which is a very fair gripe, and it said the average price of a starter home was $1 million. Now I don't know. That's from the yard sign. I've done my own fact checking. This is what I'm getting from the Zillow, but like that. So if it's not $1 million, it's up there. It's pretty darn high. And 840. You probably be very tough to be a first time home buyer and move into Arlington County. Again, it's a spring primary. It's off year. My guess is turnout is pretty low compared to November, compared to an even numbered year. And the kind of people who vote in an Arlington County Democratic primary in June are the leftiest of the left. They're willing to settle for that sensible, moderate Bernie Sanders. That's the kind of people who are going to vote, which is why you end up with no, we cannot arrest illegal immigrants, even if they're wanted on terrorism. They have to be allowed to live their American dream, which in many cases is probably killing Americans.
Unbelievable.
Hey, Greg, what county is the Pentagon in?
Yeah,
Arlington County. Yeah. What fire department responded on 9/11? Arlington County. Okay, just checking. All right. Yeah.
Yep. How soon they forget. Human trafficking, violent felonies, gang members. No, we love you way more than Trump. So, way to have your priorities in order, Arlington. All right. I'll tell you where you will get your priorities in order, and that is Hillsdale College. They love the founders. They love law and order. They don't have this kind of nonsense advocating on their campus. They'll tell you about the law by Frederick Bastiat, though, and you'll learn a lot about private property rights and the role of the government protecting life, liberty, and property. In fact, Hillsdale College is now offering you a chance to learn what their students learn: why capitalism is the best economic system on the planet. The 7-course series is entitled Understanding Capitalism.
Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses, which I guess really isn't very capitalist, but we'll let that go. It's free. You can learn about the U.S. Constitution, stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's free online courses. Hillsdale recently launched the new choice, Understanding Capitalism, and the only flaw they have is that they're giving it away for free. But then again, maybe that's the gateway drug, Greg.
Yeah, their mission is to make sure that the truth is known as far and wide as possible in this world gone mad. In this series, you'll learn about the role of profit and loss, how human nature plays a role in our economic system, and why capitalism is a system that actually encourages morality, despite what you hear in the media and on other campuses. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free. All right, Jim, on to the crazy/bad. I was just minding my own business. I'm sure you were too yesterday afternoon. All of a sudden on social media, you see these things pop up where James Comey's communing with nature again, which is always tedious. But this time I was a little more curious. On Instagram, he's walking along the beach, contemplative, I'm sure. And he says, cool shell formation on my beach walk. And there are 4 numbers made by small shells, 8647, 8647. As we all know, Trump is now the 47th president of the United States. And of course, the number before that then is 86. Basically, it means to get rid of something, whether you're out of it at a restaurant, so 86 that from the menu. I always heard growing up that there was a bootlegging term from Chicago where at the time there was a local Highway 86 and, hey, the cops are coming. Get the whiskey, get the liquor out on 86 the liquor. Either way, a lot of people are looking at this as we've got to get rid of Trump. Some say this includes violent means or whatever means necessary. So once that got talked about, Comey takes down that post and then says, I posted earlier a picture of some shells I saw today on a beach walk, which I assumed were a political message. I didn't realize some folks associate those numbers with violence. It never occurred to me. But I oppose violence of any kind, so I took the post down. Nonetheless, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi say they're looking into it. Trump says Comey's a dirty cop from obviously back in the day of Crossfire Hurricane and everything else. And so, Jim, I certainly don't buy Comey's second post. And I'm not sure, as you mentioned in a corner post today, what he's trying to accomplish with the first one if he's not suggesting by any means necessary.
Well, first of all, Greg, you can't fool me. You're never occurred to me. That's your Andrew Cuomo impression. That's slipping through there. Secondly, I'm stunned that you did not describe as your preferred metaphor of 86th, as in the 86th is what the Chicago Bears defense in the mid-'80s did. The 46th defense did to opposing quarterbacks. They 86th them, as in they took them out. So I find both sides a little overwrought here. I don't know if we need the entire U.S. government jumping onto Jim Comey over what turned out to be a rather silly and ill-thought one. I did like Kat Rosenfeld's joke where she said, for those who are not in the know, 86 was restaurant industry lingo for taking something off the menu because you've run out of it. So when she used to be a waitress, and she said when the chef would say 86 the meatloaf, everyone would pull out their guns and shoot the meatloaf to death. So it's not necessarily the cone of assassination, but it generally was remove, get rid of. Now, the problem here is, let's say, first of all, and by the way, everybody's pretty sure Comey wasn't walking on the beach. This is some meme floating around that he decided to pass off as his own. So that's possibility number one. But let's say he puts that out there. And let's say you're saying 86-47. And let's say you don't mean assassination. But how would you like to take President Trump off the menu? Because he's not resigning. He's term limited. He's in his second term. I know every now and then he talks about running for a third term, but we know that's barred under the Constitution. And he's, there was one House Democrat, Sri Thanadar, who I believe was one of the villains in the He-Man cartoon, said that he was going to push for an impeachment hearings. And even other House Democrats were saying this is an idiotic idea. This is a horrible idea. I'm not paraphrasing. Those are their actual quotes, according to Axios. Nobody thinks, Republicans control the House. It's not a big margin, but they got a margin. Republicans control the Senate. We'll see how the midterms go. Donald Trump is not getting impeached again. So he's not going to resign. He's term limited, and you're not going to impeach him. How do you want to, quote unquote, take him off the menu then? What's left? Something really terrible happened. We've already had 2 attempts on it. So as much as I think Comey is spectacularly ill thought out here. Having said that, I don't think there's any need for the FBI or Secret Service or anybody else to investigate this, and I'll tell you why. Greg, when Biden was testifying about the documents that were classified that were found in his residence, and he said a lot of things that were, flat out not true. Robert Hur said there's no way we're going to get a conviction because the jury is going to believe that Joe Biden is a kindly old man with memory issues. Now, Biden complained about this, but can't you just picture that if they attempted to prosecute Jim Comey for threatening Donald Trump's life, don't you think his lawyers would say, Your Honor, my client cannot be guilty for reason of idiocy? Not insanity, idiocy. My client is too dumb to know what the term 86 means. Don't you think a jury would buy that?
No.
Really?
Depends where you prosecute him, because, he's the former FBI director. Remember Elliot Ness, the guy that was
Greg, how in the world is the FBI director going to know lingo about assassinating people by mobsters? He's never going to run across that sort of thing.
Gosh. Trump's largely right. I mean, this is probably not the worst thing Comey's done. The worst thing he did was giving Hillary Clinton a free pass when he spent 10 minutes in that press conference explaining why in any other situation she would have been charged. And then, of course, Crossfire Hurricane, where he kept signing off on FISA warrants based on the Steele dossier, which by the later warrants, he signed off on that evidence knowing that it was false. That should get him in a lot of legal trouble.
All right, because I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people, upon seeing this anecdote, said, I understand how he ended up with the 8647 written in front of him. Clearly, Bill Clinton was walking in front of him, and he's the one who arranged the seashells in that thing. I do not subscribe to that theory at all, because if Bill Clinton's walking down the beach, he's not going to say 8647. He's going to say 6942.
Oh, no.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. We'd love to have them listening. Also, thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great weekend. Join us again Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.